battery was running out, so I just needed to. Wait, hold on.
You want to sit at
Yeah.
that end or this?
You won't be in the shot, don't worry.
Oh, you did.
Yeah, that way, just for the first session, because we're running out of battery, and I'll move it to that way, so. I can try to do that a little bit.
Ready for first question.
Yeah,
Just like, was there any service?
Oh, and it's such a creature of habit, you really have to move the board back to the other.
sorry, sorry. Just for this session, I've got to do this because my computer's out of battery, so just got to do it that way.
Right. May I join you?
It's,
Oh,
Yeah, mechitza is our topic today. So,
oh.
okay. Today we are following through, we're going down a certain path, understanding role of separation of genders and that sort of thing. We've done LGBTQ, we've done other aspects, and so moving into the understanding of gender equality and these sort of aspects, I thought it was important to discuss today the idea of the mechitza. The mechitza is the divider that runs down the middle of a synagogue, separating men and women. There is also a mechitza at the Kotel, at the Wailing Wall. And I wanted to speak about its history, its textual sources, its meaning, and the implications of such a choice. Interestingly enough, this class is about what we do in terms of Reform Jews and what others choose to do, and the other denominations. There is nothing in Reform Judaism about this, because when Reform Judaism was founded, it was founded without it. It said, we don't need this and we're not going to use it. So, and we'll talk about that decision and how it affected the other denominations. The conservative, I don't have much about conservative either, because the mechitza did not really exist within the conservative movement either. There was voluntary or suggested or, sort of unclear separations between men and women at a certain point in the seminary, the conservative seminary, JTS, but that went away relatively quickly. It has not been present in conservative synagogues. That being said, conservative Judaism does provide its congregations with the autonomy and the choice to do so. So if a conservative synagogue chooses to have a mechitza, they can. I am not aware of a great deal of them. They may exist. But for the most part, and I would say the vast majority, mechitza is within the Orthodox spectrum, modern through ultra-Orthodox spectrum. Okay, and we're going to talk about this object, this ritual object, the course of it all, and we'll talk, of course, how that goes in terms of why Reform Judaism rejected it, and Conservative Judaism, as well as Reconstructionist Renewal, they all rejected it, and why Orthodox continues to have it. Okay?
Question, does the synagogue here in town?
No. The synagogue, the shul here does not have a pizza. It came up at a board meeting. There was a discussion about it. The board voted down that option. Yes.
What do they do with children?
Children typically are not particularly present in worship, but the mechitza doesn't necessarily apply until bar mitzvah age, typically until adulthood. Typically, kids, it's not as rigorous as that sort of aspect. Okay. So the mechitza, which basically means partition, mechitzot in plural, used in Orthodox synagogues to separate men and women during formal prayer service. Okay, so that you know, in the ultra-Orthodox circuits, it extends beyond worship services. Weddings are separated. Beaches have two mechitzas on each side if there are women who are in swimsuits. And there are other places that the mechitza may arrive in other formal or informal worship places, certainly within the ultra-Orthodox movement. Okay. I wanted to make sure that it was clear that there is a lesson that is being taught within the Orthodox that is just untrue about this. Okay, that there is a thought within the ultra-Orthodox that the mechitza has existed since the time of the first temple, since 700 BCE, and that every synagogue since has had one, and it simply goes back to that specific one. And that even the second temple 2,000 years ago, that it's enshrined in the Talmud, that it's stable in. Okay, I want to make sure that we debunk that because it is an important thing to debunk. While I certainly respect the Orthodox and their beliefs, from a historic point of view, that simply is untrue. It's historically inaccurate. Okay. Over the centuries, men and women most likely didn't sit together. Remember that for the most part, women did not come into synagogue at all for centuries. Women did not have the obligation, nor was it culturally appreciated that they would come into synagogue. And so mostly it was men who were worshiping anyway. When women did start to come and worship, it was more informal, sitting separately, local customs, but there is no historical evidence that it was law anywhere. We're talking about within Ashkenazic, Russian, Eastern Europe, Mediterranean, Sephardic customs. There is no evidence within in Halakha or anything like that this was law, that this was a halakhic ruling that was followed in widespread and agreed upon. It simply was, like many things in our culture and in our religion, a custom that sort of gained popularity in certain areas. People did it based on tradition, and that's it. Okay, we don't even have evidence that it was ever a local law. It simply was the way it was. Okay, there was no rabbinic ruling on it. Okay, the idea that a mechitza is law and is mandatory actually happened, interestingly enough, as a reaction to what we call the Haskalah, the Jewish Enlightenment. Okay, when Judaism in the 18th century was exposed to assimilation, to logic and science and philosophy, there was a Haskalah, an enlightenment, and with it was the birth of Reform Judaism. Reform Judaism grew out of that movement in the early 19th century. It was the first of the movements to embrace assimilation and all kinds of new ideas. So remember, we've spoken about this before, that when Reform Judaism was founded in the 19th century, it broke Judaism basically in half. It split Judaism into what was at the time German Reform, which was assimilated. There were. It's very different from the way Reform Judaism is today, but very, very different understandings of Judaism. What came from the other side in reaction to that were those who stayed the same. So people who have been experiencing traditional Judaism, Orthodox Judaism. But the name Orthodox Judaism was born at that time. It was just Judaism before. When Reform Judaism came, the answer was the Orthodox Judaism. So when this happened, and Orthodox, by the way, branched off into many ultra-Orthodox, Hasidic, Haredim, all these sort of ideas. But the reaction was synagogues started to appear without mechitza, without the custom of men and women sitting together. And so as a reaction to that, the Orthodox had to create rules, new rules on prayer and gender. Okay, and as the world was getting a little bit more modern with men and women praying together and being together more, Orthodoxy started to feel that a little bit and had to clarify its own position as to, now that women are coming to the synagogue, what do we do and why? Okay, so the idea of the mandatory aspect of mechitza occurred in the 19th century. Okay, that is extremely, extremely, extremely late, friends. Okay, very, 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 very late. All right. Again, it was a custom for centuries and centuries. Certainly different ideas of it, whether it was sitting by themselves, whether there was a divider or partition, the balcony, all these sort of things were very customary, very in terms of minhag. But the idea of law, of religious law coming from rabbis, occurred 19th century. Okay? However, certain, and I don't want to ever paint a wide brush or anything like that, but there are certain denominations of Orthodoxy that not only create new rules, but do their best to teach how it goes back and sort of understand things from a back-sided all the way up. In other words, if we look at it from a secular point of view, one might say you're rewriting history. But from an Orthodox point of view, they're connecting what they do to things that occurred earlier. And that makes sense because every ruling that comes out of halakha comes from rules and laws and things from thousands of years ago. What they cannot change, unfortunately, is the fact that things didn't always go that way. But they don't learn about that so much. This is the ultra-Orthodox. Okay, modern Orthodox is completely different. But in the ultra-Orthodox, in the very sort of separated and isolated communities, the idea of history and archaeology and those sort of things aren't really topics that are spoken about. Okay, so what we ultra-Orthodox came up with, and the Orthodox, even at that time, in terms of the modernity of ultra-Orthodox, to reach back into the text was that you can't just make a new rule, right? It has to be grounded in some sort of Torah, Tanakh, Talmud, rabbinic sort of source. Okay. So there were two, okay? The Babylonian Talmud, which was codified in the 5th century CE, okay, in Tractate Sukkah 51b, 52a, describes, from a historical point of view, a divider in the form of a balcony in the Great Temple, okay? The Great Temple, first of all, was destroyed in 586 BCE. This is 1,000 years later that they're writing about it, okay? But what they're talking about is in the temple, there was a balcony, okay? However, it was only set up during that is not Rakesh, that's supposed to be Sukkot. Festive moments, Sukkot, okay, gotta love that. Simchat Beit HaShover, a water drawing ceremony, and there's another Sukkot, so that must have been something else. So otherwise it was not used. In other words, the idea, friends, is that this balcony was used on special occasions, rarely on a few holidays. Okay, it was not used regularly. Okay, the Babylonian Talmud records this. Okay, it says, as it is stated, the land will eulogize each family separately, the family of the house of David separately, and their women separately, the family of the house of Nathan separately, and their women separately. So that's quoting from Zechariah 12:12, that line. Okay, and that's from a historical point of view. The prophet Zechariah is talking about when there is a funeral, okay, and you eulogize it, you do it separately. Again, one moment, one aspect, Okay, it's talking about in one particular aspect. The Talmud argues this indicates that at the end of days, a great eulogy will be organized during which men and women will be separate. Okay? They said, and are these matters not inferred a fortiori? In other words, does this not mean that it's always been this way? If in the future, at the end of days, referred to in this prophecy when people are involved in a great eulogy and consequently the evil inclination does not dominate them, as typically during the morning, inappropriate thoughts and conduct are less likely, and nevertheless, the Torah says men separately and women separately. The Torah does not say that. Zechariah does, okay? They're talking about the law here. And now that they are involved in celebration of drawing of the water, as such evil inclination dominates them, since celebration lends itself to levity, all the more so should men and women be separate.
Really, it's not
Sure, yeah. What you see here, friends, at the bottom where it says all the more so, okay, there is a Talmudic rule that is chas v'shalom or chas v'chalila, which means, God forbid, all the more so, these sort of, or sorry, kal v'homer is all the more so. Sorry, the other one is God forbid. Kal v'homer, which means all the more so, which means in legal code, in rabbinic code, if something makes sense for one thing, it argues that all the more so, it should do so here. So what the Talmud is saying is, since they sit together in these, or sit separately in these moments of mourning or whatever it is, that there might be these sort of ideas of levity and evil inclination, all the more so we should just do it all the time. Okay? Should women and women be separate? Okay? That's the Babylonian teaching aspect here. Okay? The Talmud also cites a teaching that we're not allowed to daven, to pray in the presence of an irva. Okay? The irva is an immodestly dressed woman. Okay? In other words, you see a woman who is not immodestly dressed, you're not allowed to pray near her. Okay? Brachot 24a states, Tifach ba'isha erva, an area of uncovered skin of a woman is erva. In other words, if anything is unskinned, okay, or unclothed, uncovered, and we will talk about modesty in another session, but things like arms and hair and heels or ankles and that sort of stuff, okay, where it is actually not defined, but later obviously was defined. One must not pray in the presence of a woman where this much skin is exposed. So that's one part. The Gemara, meaning the Talmud, which comments on this, states, Shmuel, meaning Rav Shmuel, could have said to you, and according to Rav Yosef's opinion, does it work out well? Wasn't it taught that in the same baraita, a baraita is a law that occurs in the Talmud that is not from the Mishnah, okay? That one who is sleeping in a bed and his children and members of his household are beside him, he may not recite Shema until a garment separates between them. Okay, there's a law, apparently, a baraita, outside of the Mishnah that they're bringing into the Talmud to say, hey, wait a minute, don't you remember there's this law that says you're not allowed to say the Shema if you're in bed unless a garment separates you and your wife and children. Doesn't Rav Yosef hold that his wife is like his own flesh and no separation is necessary? In other words, the Baraita says that's not necessarily true. Doesn't if you are flesh of one flesh, you don't need a separation to say the Shema. Rather, what you have to say in response. Rav Yosef holds that there is a Tanaitic dispute, meaning the Tanaim were rabbis, a rabbinic dispute. In the case of one's wife, I too hold that it is Tanaitic dispute, and I accept the ruling of one of the Baraita. Basically, that one, you could just pick anything, okay? They're just talking about, you're talking about people disagreeing with each other, okay? There's a Baraita that says this, but the Talmud says this, we can talk about this, doesn't this say this? In other words, it's not clear, okay? All they can do, because there is not anything clear in the Torah or the Tanakh or the Mishnah, or even in this Baraita, is that they can just infer from other laws as to what we should do. The idea of Kal v'chomer, the idea of all the more so, okay, if it happens in one instance, maybe we should then do it for other instances. It's not a particularly strong argument. So what they're trying to do here is say, well, let's think back to the Shema laws. The Shema laws, you're supposed to separate. But then a rabbi said, why would you separate with your wife? You're of one flesh. And they said, no, I agree with this first one. So it doesn't really help us, okay? But these are the only aspects in biblical and rabbinic, up until the 5th century, right, law about separating men and women, okay? In Zechariah the prophet, it talks about this great eulogy, and when someone eulogizes, you should sit men and women separately. It doesn't say anything about weddings or worship or anything like that. That's all it says, okay? The Talmud says, okay, if this is what you're supposed to do, all the more so we should do it all the time. And the Talmud also cites, you might see women parts. There's women with unclothed areas, and you're not allowed to pray around them. So we shouldn't pray about them. Maybe a garment or something would help. This is really where we're starting to get, okay? But I hope you're seeing that there is not a solid foundation for this here, okay? There is no mention of any mechitza in the temple in Jerusalem, not during the first or second temple, okay? Nor are there mentions in the Talmud, okay? The only time we see the idea to separate is the idea of the balcony in the temple. There is no mention of a divider in the Great Temple, ever. First or second, there's no mention of a divider in worship in the entire Talmud, okay? President of the Schechter Institutes, the Solomon Schechter schools and those sort of things, Rabbi David Golenkin writes, towards the end of the Second Temple period, by the way, goes all up until the 1st century CE, okay? Directed that a women's gallery be constructed in the women's court to keep the sexes separate only during the somewhat lightheaded celebration of the water festival during Sukkot. Okay? In other words, when things get a little bit crazy, okay, I'm surprised I didn't mention Purim, but when things get a little bit crazy, there was a understood idea that in the Second Temple, up towards the year 0 to 70 CE, there was a women's gallery. Again, not a mechitza, a balcony. Okay, so that whatever the celebration of the water festival is, I have no idea what it is, gets a little crazy, where you get lightheaded, you're separate, okay? During the balance of the year, men and women mingled freely in the women's court, okay? In other words, men could go in, women could go in, it was fun. It was named the women's court because it marked the limit of approach by women who were not bringing sacrifices to the inner courts of the temple. In other words, if you remember the idea of the temple, there's all these levels you have to get into. Rooms, okay? Women only got so far, okay, into the women's court. Then there was the other courtyard, and there was the other courtyard, and you got finally into the Holy of Holies where the Kohen could be, okay? So that was named as, this is as far as women can go, okay? There is no literary or archaeological basis for assuming the existence of a synagogue separation during the period of the Mishnah and the Talmud. In other words, if you argue that from the destruction of the temple in 70 CE, all the way up to the 5th century CE, that synagogues had mechitza or separations in some way, it's an argument from silence. There's no mention, no archaeological evidence to suggest that. You can think it, but there's no real basis to think it, okay? From what we knew of the time, there might have been balconies, men and women might have sat separately. People may have interpreted when the synagogue began of the idea of the women's court and things like that, but there is no basis to say that a mechitza existed during this time. Okay? Yes.
Could that have come from the fact that during this time the women were not educated in Talmud, in Torah, and 2, they were supposed to be taking care of the kids?
Well, there is a certainly this again goes back again to the idea of that there was an absence of women anyway, okay, that in synagogue settings during this time. Certainly women were culturally at that point well, one, Jewishly not obligated to go pray, but also culturally probably taking care of families and things like that. And you're right, we're not allowed to study Torah or that sort of stuff. I don't think there is a direct correlation. I think sometimes there were women who came to synagogue, and so people made the choices that they made. But I would say up to the 5th century, it was probably pretty rare that that women were present very much in synagogue settings. That probably happened a lot later. Okay. So that's up to the 5th century. Okay, we're up to the 5th century. The next mention, okay, actually the first mention of the Mechitza comes from the Gaonic period, from the Gaonim, like Sadia Gaon. These were great scholars and rabbis. This is the 11th century. Okay, first mention is at the end of the 11th century, and from then on, from the 11th century, there's been occasional mentioning in rabbinic law books and that sort of stuff. Okay, there are lots of law books and law people who were going around, and commentators, Rashi, Rambam, all these sort of people. It would come up occasionally, okay, but not until we're talking about 500 years later, okay? Only until the end of the 19th century, okay, the late 1800s, that we have a halakhic source, meaning a law code requiring separation in the synagogue. Again, very, 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 very good, okay? One thing I do want to mention here is that most of our Orthodox friends take a great deal of weight in terms of a book called the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch by Yosef Karo was the 16th century, okay? And this book took all the majority opinions of the Talmud from Yosef's understanding and wrote it down. It is a huge Orthodox volume of law code. It's known simply as the law, the code, Shulchan Aruch, okay? Shulchan Aruch, by the way, is translated to the set table, okay? But really fascinating, the Mechitza is not mentioned once in the Shulchan Aruch, okay? How do you spell that? Shulchan Aruch.
I wasn't gonna ask. I just left that blank there.
Shulchan, which is table, Aruch, set. Okay? Shulchan Aruch. All right, that's 16th century. And that's Yosef Karo. Right? A major halakhic source.
So this is something that a lot of they will quote that.
Yes,
Or
the Orthodox. This is, I believe, that I would say one of the primary documents of Orthodox halakhic law. Okay, what it did was it took away the discussion from the Talmud and said, this is it. This is what you have to do. So they refer to the Shulchan Aruch. Now, it is not by any means alone. Okay, there are many other law codes and books that followed and preceded it, but this is a major move. And the fact that the Mechitza does not appear here cannot be understated. Okay, or overstated, whatever the thing is. It's really crazy, okay, that it doesn't appear in the Shulchan Aruch, okay? During my research, I encountered a couple times a joke that people like to tell, which is an Orthodox Jew and a conservative Jew ask what do we see in the fact that the Mechitza is not in the 16th century Shulchan Aruch? And the conservative Jew says we infer from this that the Mechitza is not mandatory. The Orthodox Jew says we infer that women in synagogue are not mandatory. Okay? So, again, it is a joke, but not mine, okay? But you can see the fact that it is not there. Again, these are arguments for fighting, okay? And inferences and ideas that if it was separated, balconies or whatever it is, but it is not some of the other really explicit and understood law codes by the Orthodox or conservative or Reform even in terms of response and things like that. It's a very unsteady trail that led up to the 19th century. Okay, really important to discuss this in regards to the feature that is present at the hotel. Ultra-Orthodox have pushed very, very hard at the divider between men and women at the hotel. It is baseless. Okay, it is simply, it is a 19th century rabbinic ruling. Okay, it's not historic. It's not like it's ever been there. Okay, that's why it's so troubling to Reform Judaism. We understand halakha. We respect textual sources and textual criticism and that sort of stuff, but there's just not enough there to support it from a Reform point of view.
In Israel, after all, it's always been there.
No, it's not always been there.
Because I remember when I was in junior high and I got a scholarship and went to Israel with a mystery trip. I don't remember.
It wasn't always there. No, it was relatively recent that it was put there. Okay, to say nothing of the fact that it is not in the middle. Okay, the women's side is insultingly smaller. Okay, but no, it is not. I don't remember exactly when the divider came up, but I imagine it was sometime in the 90s or something like that. 80s or 90s.
Yeah, because
So-
when I was there was none.
What year was that?
And,
I don't want to age
yeah,
you.
well, I was 59 and I was in junior high, so it was a while back.
So a while back, okay. So either way, again, it's not something that's been there forever. Okay, we have to remove that aspect from this discussion. Okay, that it has and always will be. Okay, it's a real issue to say that. It's simply untrue. It is perfectly fine to say that in the 19th century that halakha was decided and that's law. Okay, that's the Orthodox understanding. It is not okay to say this is how it has always been. Okay. I have quoted for you here 3 other textual sources that discuss it. Okay. Yeah, pretty much. They all say the same thing. The Khatam Sofer, okay, Orach Chaim 5190. That's Moses Schreiber, an Orthodox rabbi. This was 19th century. Okay, he said this is right according to our Torah law to listen to the voice of a woman in shul, in a place that men congregate. The women's voice goes from the women's section to the men's section. The reason for this is that we believe that all prayer and praise and thanksgiving should not be mixed with improper thoughts. Okay, this is where we start to see the idea of improper thoughts. Okay, and because of this, we separate the women from the men in shul to make sure they do not come to think improper thoughts during the time of prayer. And we learn this from the water libation ceremony that is spoken about in Tractate Sukkah. This is the Talmudic aspect that we were talking about with the water separation, okay? Where they made sure that women were above and men below, so that they would not come to what is called kalut rosh, okay? Which is silliness, okay? Kalut rosh, issues in the head, okay? Silliness, okay? In other words, it's a good thing that the women were above you and not in front of you because you would erupt into silliness, okay? Yeah.
Yeah, that was the meeting.
Yes. Yes, to say that we do not have that kind of self-control
Yes.
says more about us than it does about ladies. As it is said on their 52a, again, this is what we quoted before from the Talmud 52a, Babylonian Talmud Sukkah 52a. As it says, in the land shall mourn, every family apart, the family of the house of David. It's quoting Zechariah again, okay? And it is Kal v'chomer, all the more so, okay? That is the rabbinic ruling here, Kal v'chomer. Here, where they are talking about a eulogy where there is no evil inclination, the Torah tells us that men and women were separate. And here that we were talking about happiness, where there is an evil inclination, all the more so there should be a separation. In other words, there is a rabbinic idea that when you are mourning, the evil inclination is not there. It does not exist. Okay? We have, according to rabbinic legend, we have what's called Yetzer Tov, good inclination, and Yetzer Hara, evil inclination. Okay, this is the angel and devil on your shoulders. Okay, that was Judaism who came up with that. Okay, Yetzer Tov, Yetzer Hara. Okay, the rabbi here is arguing that the Talmud is arguing that when you are eulogizing someone, when you are in mourning, the evil inclination, your Yetzer Hara, doesn't exist. He is therefore arguing that when you're doing happy things, like water ceremonies and worship and other sort of things, it is there. So all the more so should we protect our feeble men minds from silliness that may occur and take us away from the proper prayer. Make sense?
Is that why the men and women didn't dance together during marriage?
Oh my god, dancing? Whoa. Basically just sex, man. I mean, that's all it is. Okay? No, sir. No. So, that is from the Katan Sofer, okay, who was trying to argue, and this is in the 19th century, okay? Trying to say, look, this is what the Talmud says. There is a Kal V'Homer on this, okay? The Kal V'Homer is the rabbinic law to say, if it doesn't exist here, then all the more so, we've got to do it here, okay? Yes?
What would another interpretation of this passage be? Because to me, I'm seeing this like families of these different houses, and so another interpretation would be that they're just like separating people.
Oh,
To
sure.
say like, look, each individual person needs to like, not necessarily as groupings, but maybe this is speaking more. I don't know.
Well, here's the thing. If we study Zechariah,
Mhm.
there will be, 100 other interpretations.
Yeah.
You're right. What's important here is that we are taking the Talmudic interpretation as law and saying that's what it means, right? That's a big problem, right? Is saying this is the interpretation. Remember that we talked about how the Mishnah and the Talmud and the Midrash answered the questions for you before you could ask them, all right? If the Talmud says this, God forbid you'd ask, could it mean something else? Okay, this was the oral law whispered to Moses on Sinai, okay? There's no way that they were wrong, okay? Except for the fact that they might have been wrong, okay? So if they were wrong, okay, just like many other things, then that undermines the entire argument. So that's not even within the mindset of this, okay? The mindset is, this is exactly what Zechariah meant, and because Zechariah meant it, we infer this, and because of this, Kal V'Homer this. That's a pretty standard rabbinic law traveling, okay, in terms of this is what this means, therefore, this is what it needs to do, therefore, this is what we should do. That's basic rabbinic law code, okay? There's nothing, strange about this sleep, okay? It's pretty standard, okay? The Maharam Sheikh, okay, his book, in Orach Chaim, Moses Sheikh, of course, this is even later, 19th century in Hungary. He says we are commanded to create a separation between the men's section and the women's section, like there was in the Beit HaMikdash. The Beit HaMikdash is the great temple, okay, where they had a separate space for men and a separate space for women. And before us, we need to create a decree so that the men do not see the women, because that brings them to have Kali Rosh, silliness, and other sins. Okay? This is interesting because he says we need to create a decree. Okay? In other words, he's saying they separated in the Beit HaMikdash, rather. Now that we are here in the 19th century, we need to create a halakhic code to do this. Okay? He says if you look at the Tosfot Yom Tov, a 16th century text, about those who break this law as one who should not so in the shul, because it is seen as a mikdash miyat, a small temple. Okay? Soloveitchik, okay? Joseph Soloveitchik was known as the Rav, okay? An incredible man, incredible rabbi, incredible author. He worked a great deal with the Lubavitcher Rebbe, okay, of the Chabad movement. He wrote a book on interfaith dialogue called Confrontation. He also wrote books like Halakhic Man and all these other amazing, amazing books about how to live as an Orthodox Jew, okay, in the 20th century, all right? So very highly respected. However, he is wrong here, okay? So I'm just saying, like, I respect this man a great deal. I read his books, I've taken classes on him, I respect Soloveitchik in an amazing way. He is wrong here. The separation of the sexes, he says in the synagogue, is a basic tenet of our faith. No, it is not. It dates back to our very dawn of our religious halachic community. No, it does not. And constitutes a Pentateuchal injunction, Isur D'Oraita. Okay? No, it does not. Which can never be abandoned by any legislative act on the part of a rabbinic or lay body. Yes, it can. Regardless of its numeric strength or social prominence. What was decreed by God can never be undone by human hand. That's fine, except this wasn't decreed by God. Zechariah was not. I mean, that's not how it goes. Okay?
So he's quoting the sources and giving the impression that this is the way it should, but there's no sources to support it.
Correct. So the response is during the 1950s, Soloveitchik ruled that it was forbidden to pray in the synagogue without separation between the sexes, and that this law was actually midoraita, an actual law in the Torah. Friends, it is not. I love Soloveitchik, but it does not exist in the Torah. At the time, during this politically social fighting between Orthodox and non-Orthodox, many Orthodox Jews accepted this claim as correct. Today, however, no person takes this claim seriously. There is not a mitzvah in the Torah on this subject, anywhere. He further stated that the use of the mechitza, as we know it today, was mid'Rabbanan, a rabbinical prohibition from the Talmud, which we've discussed, okay? Which we now know is mistaken. He misread the Talmudic text about the temporary partition erected during a raucously celebration, Simchat Beit HaShodeah, water drawing ceremony on Sukkot. Okay? So, I love Joseph Soloveitchik. This was a major misstep on his part. He convinced many Orthodox that this came from the Torah itself, and many believed it. How could you not? Soloveitchik was a huge voice, a booming voice of the 20th century. If he said it, it was. Okay? His interpretation is a human interpretation, which humans make mistakes. He made mistakes. He misinterpreted a Talmudic idea, and he misspoke about the idea that it was Pentateuchal. It is not Pentateuchal. There is nothing in the 5 books of Moses about a mechitza anywhere.
It's interesting, it's almost as though he was worried about being caught in that, and then said, and whatever in the future tries to change this legislatively, it's not, it's almost like, okay, why
I
do you have
mean,
to do that?
he double, triple down, but,
Yeah.
but again, I'm not aware of a lot of instances where he was this blatantly incorrect. This happens to be just the one issue that he flopped on. So, highly recommend that you read some of his books, which are really beautiful and wonderful. So, some conclusions before I let us read one more little tidbit about this. Okay, and then we've got a little bit of time for discussion. Okay, so one, it is not obvious from the Talmudic text that a synagogue needs a mechitza. It is an inference. There's arguments from silence. It's not a black and white situation. Okay, it is a interpretation. The temple balcony itself, specified as employed during religious parties, is not a good paradigm for learning out the necessity or the laws of mechitza. Okay, the fact that it existed is not enough to say that it must exist. Okay, the Talmud never says that having a woman in eyesight is a form of kalud rosh. Talmud never says that. That all you have to do is look at a woman and you go crazy. Okay? It would be strange usage of that phrase, kalud rosh. In other words, Moses Schreiber, Moshe Shtick, Schick, they are really pulling this idea of kalud rosh. Okay, there are things in Orthodoxy and elsewhere from a rabbinic ruling that will cause you to lose your focus. Okay, staring at a woman is not one of them. Okay, while it is forbidden to derive pleasure from peering at a female, that is correct. It is. That does not apply more so to the times of reciting the Amidah, meaning the Tefillah, the really major prayers. Okay, than any other time. Okay. So while it is appropriate to do all we can to ensure that such thoughts are excluded or at least minimized during prayer services, that does not mean women must be out of sight for men to be able to pray. Okay? Again, this goes back to the idea of self-control. The idea that a man cannot pray the Amidah because a woman is in eyesight is not a very good argument. Okay? in any in any area, okay? Anywhere, okay? Otherwise, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein would not permit the type of mechitza that he allowed, and the temple would not allow the construction of the balcony as he did. He's talking about Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, who created, in terms of modern Orthodox mechitza, as very like white curtain partitions, okay, where you can see through. Okay, if you go to Shira Chadashah, an Orthodox synagogue in Jerusalem, where I worship all the time, there is a beautiful white curtain that has like gaps, huge gaps in it. Okay, if someone wanted to go like this, they could. Okay, so again, that doesn't solve the problem of Kalu Rosh. It doesn't solve the problem of losing focus. Okay, there's no special law not to peer at the parts of females that are generally covered during their silent Shema. In other words, who comes to temple in a bikini? Okay, usually women are dressed fine, and you can say the Shema and the Amidah. Okay, there's no law about that. Nonetheless, one may look away or close one's eyes during these moments. It's up to you, friends. If she's bothering you, close your eyes and pray. Look at the Siddur. Okay? Furthermore, as that prescription only applies to parts of female that are usually covered, in our society, arguably not much of the female would fall under this category. Okay?
So they're not concerned about women seeing men, because they're seeing a
That does not even exist. That does not even exist. Okay?
It's just the guys can't.
Women are so keen in terms of their prayer that our presence does nothing for them. Okay? Please. We are nothing in the eyes of women next to my head. Okay? Right. Okay? So before we read this letter, which is from the Lubavitcher Rebbe, the founder of the Chabad movement, okay, which is just full of wonderful things. Questions or comments about the idea of the mechitza, okay? What I really want you to take away from this, friend, is that when the topic of mechitza comes up, okay, it's important that all of you go in knowing that this is a very late argument and a very weak argument. Okay, it is very late, 19th century in terms of law. Okay, it is very weak in terms of the idea of textual sources. This is not like saying, from a kashrut point of view, okay, thou shalt not eat shellfish or whatever it is, right? It says it black and white. It's harder to argue with that. Then there's a little moment in Zechariah where they separate men and women. Okay, and the Talmud said, well, kal v'chomer. That's a pretty weak argument, okay? To say nothing of the fact that the argument is, forget the idea of inequality to women. It is demoralizing to men, okay? The fact that we couldn't possibly handle looking at the Siddur with Our Lady. It's amazing I can get to this teaching. Thank you. I mean, I don't even know, I don't even remember my name. I'm feeling a lot of silliness here. So that is a very weak argument for Kalu Rosh, okay? There is no scientific balance to it, okay? I don't believe that any woman in any synagogue anywhere, and I have served in St. Thomas where there are swimsuits, okay? I do not believe that I've ever seen a woman walk in a scantily, whatever it is, outfit. I've never seen that happen. And if so, and if it did happen, my guess is she'd be asked to leave, okay? In reality, women, like men, dress a certain way when they come into synagogue, okay? We cover our parts, right? It is a very weak idea that a woman might be showing something which takes us away from God for a moment, okay? Again, these are according to my Rabbi Mike's understanding, okay? That it is weak argument, okay? There are many who believe this is strong. There are many who say that the mechitza is empowering, that is historic. I have had many, many arguments with Orthodox rabbis about it, okay? It is a very difficult sort of thing to break in that way, okay? We're coming from completely different ends. What's really important is that if someone is telling you the mechitza has always been there since the time of the Great Temple, they are wrong. Okay? They're wrong. It hasn't been. Men and women have been separated, but not for good reasons. Women were not allowed in the synagogue, that's not a good reason. Men and women were separated by cultural, whatever, that's not a good reason. Okay? So really, really important. The Lubavitcher Rebbe, who was the founder of the Chabad movement, okay? And it was amazing, by the way. If you ever read about the Rebbe, he's an amazing guy. He would get letters from people asking questions, she'elot. Just like when we get a she'elah, a question, we answer with the responsa. The Rebbe, who is the ultimate authority, would simply answer. Okay, in rabbinic world of CCAR, we have a council who comes together and then makes a declaration. The Rebbe would be asked a question, the Rebbe would answer, and that would be law. Okay, so the question was, we actually didn't get to see what the letter was to the Rebbe, but it was regarding the partition between men and women. The person asking the Rebbe was asking that. Okay, so he says, let me preface my answer with a general observation about a misconception in this matter. It is mistaken to think that the mechitza is degrading to the honor or dignity of the Jewish women. Arguable, first of all. The best proof of this is that although the love of parents for their children is not only a very natural one, but has even been hallowed by the Torah, as we pray to God to show us the same fatherly feeling, as a father has mercy on his children. Yet there is a din, a law in the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, the volume of Orach Chaim 98, that is forbidden to kiss one's little children in shul. And moreover, even not during the time of prayer. Not to mention the din of the Torah, to esteem and honor every human being created in the image of God. To think that there could be anything degrading about the mechitza is to betray complete ignorance, not only of the significance of the mechitza, but of the whole attitude and the way of Torah. How dare you ask this question? Okay? Very strong words from the Rebbe. Okay? Unnecessarily strong words. Okay? And I completely disagree with them. To ask a question about this is in no way to show ignorance to the entire way of Torah. That's a leap. Of the inner and essential reasons for the mechitza, since you insist on an explanation, is that the synagogue and the time of the prayer in general, even when recited at home, are not merely the place and time when a formal petition is offered to him who is able to fulfill the petition. It is much more profound than that. It is the time and place when the person offering prayer unites himself with him to whom the prayer is offered by means of the prayer. And as our sages declare, know before whom you stand, before the Supreme King of Kings, the Holy One, blessed be He. Know, he says, da in Hebrew, as the term das, knowledge, is explained in the Tanya in the sense of unity, as in Adam knew Eve. The union of two things can be complete only when there is not a third element involved, be it even a matter of holiness in the life. What he is arguing, friend, is that the same verb in Adam knew Eve and know before whom you stand means the same thing. Okay, it is an intimacy. Okay, he's using the word Hebrew to say, when it says know before whom you stand, there can be no other person that you know there. Okay? No third party. From the above, it follows that there certainly must be nothing to distract the attention and the attunement of the heart and mind towards the attainment of the highest degree of unity with God. In other words, if you are trying to know God, you probably shouldn't be distracted. From the above, it also follows that the separation by the sexes by mechitza has nothing to do with any particular condition or state in the women that has been suggested by you. Okay, the Rebbe is saying this has nothing to do with women being unequal, it has nothing to do with women being sexual, okay, or your lack of ability to focus. Okay, what it has to do is, if you're trying to know God, the other person you know can't be there because you can only know one person at a time. Okay? Sure. Sort of? I mean, from his mind, what is it? Okay. I'm not asking you to agree, I'm saying you understand the argument, okay? It further follows also that the purpose of the mechitza is not just to set up a visible boundary for which the mechitza of several inches might do, but it must be one that completely hides the view. Otherwise, the mechitza does not accomplish all its purposes. Friends, many of the mechitzot in the world do not follow this. The Chabad ones do, obviously, because of what the Rebbe is saying, but there are many that do not. I have indicated above, though quite briefly, wasting my time, some of the basic facts about the mechitza and the essential explanation behind it in order to answer your questions and satisfy your curiosity. Just do it as you're told. I must say, however, quite emphatically that the approach of testing and measuring Torah mitzvot by the yardstick of the limited and often fallacious human reasoning is totally wrong. We got that, friends? Arguing the validity of Torah, not allowed. I agree. I agree. This is not in the Torah.
But also, isn't that the whole point of everything is arguing about Torah?
That's the entire Mishnah, Talmud, and Midrash. Yes, we never stopped arguing about the Torah. Okay, that's all we do is argue about the Torah. The human intellect is a very unreliable gauge and quite changeable from one extreme to another. So that you know, the Rebbe discouraged his members from going to college. So you know that, okay? Even though he's highly educated. Even in the so-called exact sciences, the unreliability of human reason and deduction has been amply demonstrated. And what was one day considered to be an absolute truth is the next day abrogated with equal certainty and absoluteness. That's true. Things change. We learn things. Okay? This does not apparently apply to anything in terms of Judaism. Hence, to presume to make conditions in regard to the eternal and God-given Torah and mitzvot is completely out of place. You're out of place to even ask. Okay? Therefore, inasmuch as we've been instructed to have a mechitza in the house of prayer, no, we haven't, it would violate even common sense to present a petition to the Almighty in a manner which displeases Him, to add insult to injury, to declare that the reason I do not accept this regulation is because my human intelligence suggests to act otherwise than is the will of the Ein Sof, the infinite God. Yet please fulfill my request. Anyway, much more should be said on this subject, but it is difficult to do so in the letter. The Lubavitcher letter.
So cold.
Or not.
So
It seems like they protest too much.
they protest too much, we think, okay? I'm not sure what the letter said to the Rebbe, but basically it was enough to get him this riled. Okay? In other words, what it seems like the guy that I was just in for, the guy was asking was, it seems like the mechitza doesn't make sense to my human intellect. Help me with this. Which he said, don't trust your human intellect. You're an idiot. You're rude for even asking. You know, I hate you. So again, this comes from the Lubavitcher Rebbe, okay, who, by the way, again, like Soloveitchik, extremely educated, extremely well respected and well known and well read, and beautiful teachings and wonderful additions to Orthodox Judaism and Judaism in general. They cannot argue this point. We have seen them try to argue. It is so bad that the Rebbe got so mad that he scolded the guy for even asking. That is not the sign of a strong halachic argument. That is a sign of a weak one. Okay? Questions?
I have an observation because this is really interesting. When Teresa went, my daughter, went 5 weeks to the women's Orthodox college in Jerusalem to study, because she had questions. And she got questions away with more questions. But at the end, she was very, very frustrated because this is exactly what she did. She was questioning a learned man, teacher, about some aspects of law that were incorrect And it had to do with her education because of sustainability. And why would you do this when this is really the facts? And they would just brush her aside.
Well, sure, it doesn't exist that way. It doesn't work that way in fundamentalism.
Yeah, and so she was just like, she came home very undocumented, which is quite amazing. But she didn't like it that they wouldn't, that science couldn't be.
Science isn't known, it's not studied. Of course it couldn't be art. It's not studied.
Yeah,
I mean, that was the birth of Reform Judaism was the acceptance that science exists and that it could affect these things, that archaeology and logic, scientific discovery, scholarship, literary criticism could be reflected upon thousands of years of thought. And when that happened, we started to correct those thoughts. Okay, we remind ourselves that the people who teach, the people who have written in the Mishnah, and the Talmud, and the Midrash, and Shulchan Aruch, and Rashi, and Rabbah, existed in their own time. They knew what they knew. As we know more, we have the power to go back and say, they were wrong. That is something that the ultra-Orthodox refuse to do. So, of course, those kind of questions. So if you believe that the Mechitza is clear in Zechariah because the Talmud says it's clear, and the ideas of Kavod Rosh and all these sort of things, then of course you would say, why would you even ask this? It's clear. Why would you even do that? But that is the assumption that it is clear. In fact, that it is not. We also have the ability to compare our understanding of certain laws and the strength of some laws and the strength of other laws. We can see a weak law. And when we have a weak law, we should be able to argue it. The Rebbe is saying, no, you can't. Not even a law like this. He comes up, and listen, the Rebbe is very good at this. Okay, the Rebbe and the Chabad movement are extremely good at placing meaning, deep meaning at places of doubt. Okay, this idea from what the Rebbe is talking about in terms of to know God and to know another person is a great argument, but it's his. Okay, it's his idea to make it from an emotional point of view, not a lawful point of view. Chabad is extremely good at that. Okay, their whole heart and soul goes into this. And if you are trying to unify with the divine, it would make sense that anyone else you have a connection to would break you away from that. And you never want that to happen. But what the Rebbe doesn't understand is that there are many who do not do that and do not believe that. And there are men and women who are capable of achieving divine understanding and prayer and things like that with each other present. The proof of that is Reform Judaism. We're doing just fine together, learning together. Okay, let's take, friends, thank you so much. We'll take 5 minutes and then we will continue on with ideology and outwork. All right, we can now have a frontal view.
Teaching us everything we learned in Sunday school is wrong.
Yeah.
That's my job. That's my job.
I love it, Rabbi. Very good.
It's not like directly related to this, but it arises from this. So it says that you're not supposed to like kiss your children or whatever. And then earlier you had said that kids usually grow. So this is an innovation of kids.
Yeah, I mean, kids probably were at home, you know, but when they did start to come, right, again, they would be distracted, right? So you're not allowed to, you know, that sort of thing. Which is very strange because at Shabbos dinner, there is a blessing of the children. You're supposed to kiss them on the cheek.
Yeah,
So-
that's kind of what I was thinking.
Yeah, but
It's
it's one
weird.
idea. It's one sort of thing. You know, it's not, you can't see it with the white brush, but you're right. I mean, like, I think, I mean, you're kissing Torah, right? You're supposed to, when it comes around, you're supposed to hold it, grab your kiss. I think Torah and being in the presence of God is the best place to kiss your child, but there are some old customs that say differently.
I just thought that was really interesting because one thing that we we're kind of noticing is like, okay, it seems as though historically all these different things going on, also like in churches, kids are, so they're like bringing babies to church and how to do church activities and things like that. So I thought that was like a big difference that.
I've never really seen a lot of kids. Worship areas, modern Orthodox, they're around, they're running around. You know, they're just like any other, thing, And the modern Orthodox, I don't think would hold to that law of your official time.
It's nice.
History days, and that's from that's 16th century,
Yeah. I mean, these days we come and talk Shabbat, PJ Shabbat.
I know, right? So yeah, so obviously, not even obviously, this is
Yeah.
on the reformer.
Yeah,
Right
yeah,
on.
yeah.
But in modern Orthodox schools,
Maybe I
kids are everywhere. They're being kids,
Okay.
so, but when it comes to the ultra Orthodox, there are
It's just interesting.
yeah, excuse me one second.
Denial.
all kinds of messages.
Yes.
And
And I'll tell Irene.
Yeah, please tell her.
So you wanna do later that night?
Tuesday.
I want to get it.
Yeah, we had 8:30 because of that, so maybe 9 instead. That's fine with me. 8:30 sounded good. Let's do 9 instead of 3 today.
When we say the Shema.
Yeah.
We do the first part
Out loud.
out loud. And the second part we're very quiet.
Yes.
What is it?
Shema goes in the Torah, in Deuteronomy, from that line straight to V'ahavta. The second line, Baruch Shem Kavod Malchut Le'olam Va'ed, does not appear in the Torah. So when we're saying Torah, we're saying it out loud, and then we break from the Torah verses, so we say it quiet.
Was that started with the reform or was that?
No.
Goes back
No. Many conservative won't even say it out loud. That's an old custom.
Oh, okay,
Yeah, no, it didn't start with us.
okay.
Not
Well,
us.
I don't
In fact,
remember it.
Reform Judaism did away with it.
Right, I remember a lot of this discussion is very interesting to me because when my parents grew up, they were very much into the assimilation stuff.
Yep.
And most of my mother would say, most of her Reform Judaism education came from us in Sunday school.
Yeah.
Because she went to Sunday school, but they were so into assimilation at that point.
Yeah.
That they really didn't gain a lot of this perspective.
They did. Classical Reform Judaism was completely different from modern day contemporary Reform Judaism. So I grew up in classical Reform, and then went and understood then contemporary Reform, and was taught through contemporary Reform. So so in seminary, even though I had grown up singing loud and proud Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto, I learned the reason why we don't do it. I liked it, and I brought it here. But there's also the removal of the break in the Torah verses is one perspective. There is another story about Jacob when he was dying. This comes from the Midrash, and Jacob's name was Israel. And his kids came up to him and they say to him, "Shema Yisrael, listen up, Jacob. Adonai is our God, Adonai is one." They're saying that to him. They're saying it to him loud because he's old. He's weak and old, and so all he can say is very quietly, in other words, and I already know. I know that. So that's another sort of midrashic sort of story about it. But the truth of it is it's a break in Torah verses.
Oh,
So
that's very interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
you're welcome.
I have to take
Okay,
Did you get my email?
I did. Yes, it was. I'm very sorry. Please let me know if you need it.
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you. Okay.
Sure.
He Okay, thank you.
Yep. Name was on the call ID and everything. So
Oh, I got the books from the library.
Great.
That you read.
read Etched in Stone. It will change your life.
Yeah.
So Dr. Aaron,
You're going to
Dr.
Two classes, trying to graduate.
David Aaron. was my professor at Stanford.
Okay, yeah.
And he is
Rearrange the room for
scary
tonight.
brilliant guy. I mean, one of those guys that like over the summer you asked what you did, you know, just for fun. Just sort of like, yeah, okay, but you know what? Anyways, his
I
teachings
think you're
were
way above.
life changing.
And that too is.
His classes. So if you go into HSC, and you're
I'm
the
gonna sit close to my.
you're one or two things.
Makes good
I
sense.
can too far away, I
One,
can't hear.
you hear how scared he is. He's very scared. He's not something. Okay, he's like, if you mess up, you mess up. You're not allowed to be late. Like he's very, he will scare you. If, however, you show that you are a student figures, whatever, he becomes like the best pal. Okay, so he became one of my best professors. I loved him to death. His criticism on papers are like the things that like nightmares are made of.
Yeah.
Like, to give you an idea, our first 101 class with him, he said from the outright, when you write your paper, that it's everyone, you will need to rewrite it. That's because you all don't know enough, because you will get it all wrong. And he was right.
Yeah.
We were completely wrong. So, as I took more and more classes with him, I couldn't get enough of his teachings of this stuff. And he is well known in Hebrew University. He studies Michael Fishbane well, and all these other Emmanuel Tove, all these like huge stuff that he would just sort of bring into the classroom. And so his books, read Eschenstone first because it's better. Biblical Ambiguities is also a cool book, but read Eschenstone. I would have recommended the third book to you, but that's what I'm using to teach this class. So you'd be bored.
Yeah.
Okay, so his book,
Yeah.
Genesis, this is ideology, I think it's called, is what I'm using to teach this next course. So like almost word for word. So if you were to get it, you'd be like, I've already read this. right?
Yeah, but
So-
yeah. Although I feel like in some ways it's good to have it in a class because there are a lot of things I don't even have the basics, so to be able to ask clarification
And that's the thing.
questions instead of
And
like
that's the point, right? Is
reading.
that
Yeah.
I could read, but I have to explain to them. So
I'm not really like well versed on the Torah or anything like that.
David does a pretty good idea,
Yeah.
a good job in his books of giving you some background, but if you have questions,
Yeah.
please, I will talk to you for about that book. That book was one of the books that in seminary I could not put down. In fact, my colleague would tell you horrifying, embarrassing story. When Dr. Aaron was talking about something in class, he says out loud, he says, "This is in my book, I just don't remember where." And I, the idiot, raised my hand and said, "That's chapter 4, sir, in your book." And everyone looked at me with these like dagger eyes, like, "What are you trying?" I was like, "I'm sorry, that was a good book." Anyway,
Do you have like, is it like grad school where you have like a mentor or is it?
no, not really. Not in seminary, you didn't have an advisor or anything like that. I mean, we had like a dean of students and we had other stuff, but when I did my master's thesis, I had an advisor. Who was Dr. Michael Cook, who was also the other scariest professor at HUC. Everyone really was like, "Why do you like these people?" I'm like, "They are so awesome, but they will beat the crap out of you." So it is amazing. All right, so friends, welcome new friends. We continue our studies of
These guys are
Ideology
taking
and
a
allegory?
2-credit class. I'm just taking
they are,
one credit.
yes. Welcome to yes, 102. They're taking 101 as well. This is a great one. Okay, I love this. This is a wonderful comparison between Sodom and Gomorrah and Jonah. Okay, so that's what we're going to get to. Very, very cool. But let's give a little backstory first. Okay, so it occurs in the Torah and in the Tanakh, as we have seen many, many, many times, an idea and its opposite. We have seen conflict. We have seen, these direct, differing ideologies hit each other. Okay, we have seen that. That occurs so much that you know how much I can't stand it when someone says that the Bible says or the Bible is clear on. The Bible is not clear on anything, okay? The Torah is not clear on anything, all right? The translator is, and the interpreter is, okay? The example that we're going to take today is the idea of Sodom and Gomorrah, okay? This text, which occurs in Genesis 18, and we'll read a little bit of it so that you can get a little bit of background, okay? The idea of it, okay, traverses all the way to a very late book, the book of Jonah, okay? Now, this is not the first time nor the last time that a story in the Torah is argued or a polemic is written against it later in the Tanakh, okay? The Torah is its own library, Genesis through Deuteronomy, different authors, different ideas, and things like that. When the prophets and those authors and the Psalms and the Proverbs, all of those things, they start to argue with each other, okay? And we have seen this sort of aspect. My favorite, besides this example, is the example of Deuteronomy and the book of Job, okay? Deuteronomy says, if you are good, you will be rewarded. If you are wicked, you will be punished. The book of Job says, nope, that's not true. It is a direct polemic, okay? Here we have seen that the influence of Sodom and Gomorrah, when the author of the book of Jonah takes a hold of it, we start to see opposing views, okay? I wanted to mention before we go into it, a sort of common problem that we encounter a great deal when we read biblical texts, okay? And that is that some of the elements of the Torah, of the Tanakh, are morally reprehensible, okay? The existence of slavery, polygamy, genocide, okay? There's horrible things, okay? Horrible things in our canon. The question that we rabbis and Jews, frankly, have
Would you put sacrifice in there, like animal sacrifices in there?
I don't want to make anyone mad, so sure. It doesn't bother me, but it might bother other people.
Okay.
Might bother PETA, I don't know. But yes, if killing an animal for sacrificial, that sounds pretty bad. So sure, yeah.
Did they eat it?
Yes, they ate parts of it.
Okay, so it wasn't like just killing it.
Parts of it, yeah. They ate parts of it. The best parts were saved for the high priest. Yeah. The other parts were burned and fed our deity. So, but yes, anyway, there's horrible things in there, okay? Much horrible things, much more horrible things than burning a cow. Like, for instance, saying that you have to marry your rapist, things like that, okay? All kinds of horrible, horrible things, okay, that we have to deal with. We cannot erase it. We cannot take it out of the canon, okay? And we can't just be neutral about it, okay? We can't just say, yeah, that's what the Torah said, okay? More importantly, we are forced to read it. Okay, we read the Torah. We are forced to read it. We can't not read it. Okay, so what do we have to do? These things that we reject. Okay, that is a larger conversation for another day. But the idea of the fact that there are problematic aspects that we read all the time in synagogue is an issue that we have to talk about. Okay. There are plenty of things that are easy to reject, okay? Things that we can just say, well, that was part of its time or whatever it is, or that law, whatever it is. But there are also situations in our Torah which are really a lot harder to, okay? Especially when our patriarchs do them, these people who are supposed to be morally awesome and our mentors and things like that, when they mess up, it's harder to reject it, to argue it. Especially if it's stories that everybody knows, okay? So there are ethical questions like the treatment of Hagar and Ishmael by Sarah, okay, from Genesis 21. Sarah saw the son whom Hagar the Egyptian had born and Abraham playing. She said to Abraham, cast out that slave woman and her son, for the son of the slave shall not share an inheritance with my son Isaac. There's nothing nice about that our mother Sarah is saying, kicking the son of Abraham out because he had sex with his handmaiden, and it was just like, anyway, that's in the Torah, okay? This little spat is in the Torah, all right? The Akedah, okay, if you were here for my sermon, I have had it with that, with the Akedah. It is a horrible lesson. Every part of it is terrible. Horrible child abuse, okay? But it's there, and everybody knows it, and we read it every Rosh Hashanah, okay? So, Sodom and Gomorrah, okay? Sodom and Gomorrah, to remind you, friends, is that there are two non-Israelite towns, Sodom and Gomorrah, that are described in the Torah as doing, they were horrible people, okay? They were sinful, they were wicked. When Lot and his family are camped out there, the men come by and say, let me have sex with more of your men. In other words, there's homosexual behavior, but not just homosexual behavior, homosexual rape, okay, which then leads to incest, which the birth of the Moabites, which we talked about a few weeks ago. So the whole place doesn't look particularly good from a biblical point of view, okay? The rabbis argue later that the reason why Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed were immoral because they were not hospitable. That hospitality is really more of what we need, but there's all kinds of things. Either way, this is the story about God saying to a prophet, Abraham, I'm going to destroy a wicked city. Okay? Really important, as we will read Genesis 18, but God recognizes the plan to destroy these cities, God's self, as problematic. God reflects. Now Adonai had said, shall I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do? Okay, you don't say, should I hide from my prophet what I'm going to do if you're 100% sure on it? Since Abraham is about to be a great and populous nation, and all the nations of the earth are to bless themselves by him, for I have singled him out, and he may instruct his children and his posterity to keep the way of Adonai by doing what is just and right, in order that Adonai may bring about for Abraham what he has promised for him. In other words, God is saying to God's self, I'm trying to teach Abraham to be the best person to do what's right, not what's wrong. I'm about to do something that's a little gray on that. Should I keep it from Abraham so that my actions don't negatively impact him?
Spoken like a good parent.
Spoken like a true parent,
A true
right?
parent.
Do as I say, not as I do situation, okay? God is reflecting upon God's self and saying, even I think this isn't quite, I'm not proud of this, okay? So first of all, we could talk all day about that in terms of God's judgment, God's being the archetype of morality, all these sort of things. But there it is right in the Torah, okay? God having second thoughts. The authors of the story are aware of how the story's development reflects badly upon God, okay? You can't not be. They provide a rather muddled pretext, okay? The sin of these cities is excessive, the Torah says, which implies that God has no alternative but to destroy them. But the details remain sparse, and just how we are to understand excessive remains ambiguous. It is this lack of clarity that leads Abraham to challenge the deity. In other words, they talk about how excessively bad Sodom and Gomorrah is, okay? But they don't say how explicitly. They don't say what they're doing, okay? The other stories about the, bring us those people so we can rape them, that's later. But the idea of saying in the Torah, they're bad people, it's not clear, it's vague, okay? So the authors know this, okay? So what they try to say is they're really bad, okay? That's all you have to know, that they're really bad, okay? And then we get this wonderful and well-known text from Genesis 18. The men went on there from Sodom while Abraham remained standing there before God. Abraham came forward and said, will you sweep away the innocent along with the guilty? What if there should be 50 innocent within the city? Will you then wipe out the place and not forgive it for the sake of the innocent 50 who are in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to bring death upon the innocent as well as the guilty, so that innocent and guilty fare alike. Far be it from you. Shall not the judge of the earth deal justly? Have any of you guys ever done this sort of psychological arguing? Right? Surely you would not be able to do this. I know you, man. This isn't you. Okay? No way you could do this. This is a mistake. I must have misinterpreted it. Okay? That's what Abraham's doing. And God said, if I find within the city of Sodom 50 innocent ones, I'll forgive the whole place for their sake. Okay? Let the bartering begin. Abraham spoke up, saying, here I venture to speak with my Lord. I am who is but dust and ashes. What of the 50 innocent should lack 5? Will you destroy the whole city for want of the 5? He answered, I will not destroy if I find 45 here. Okay? But he spoke to God again and said, what if 40 should be found there? And he answered, I will not do it for the sake of 40. And he said, let not my Lord be angry if I go on. Sorry. What if 30 should be found there? And he answered, I will not do it if I find 30. And he said, I venture to speak again. What if 20 should be found there? And he answered, I will not destroy for the sake of 20. And he said, let not my Lord be angry if I speak but this last time. What if 10 should be found there? And he answered, I will not destroy for the sake of 10. That's where it ends. Abraham was doing great. Okay? He was complimenting God. He was saying, listen, I know you're the boss. You're awesome. I'm sorry. What about? But we are, as Torah readers, left to believe that we could not find 10 people, even among children, in the whole of Sodom and Gomorrah, which my guess would be tens of thousands. Are we to imagine that there could be a circumstances in which children are so irredeemably evil as to warrant a death sentence? That is the takeaway we need to stomach. Okay? Could it be that in Sodom and Gomorrah, not even 10 innocent, non-evil children could be found? If so, what are we to teach regarding the meaning of this story then? If you're supposed to teach the Torah as a life lesson, as a moral guidebook, what is the lesson here? Okay? The only thing that you can take from a Torah point of view is that obviously there weren't 10 kids who were good people enough. The destruction of the city was justified. You have to think this because God would not have done it, right? If you believe that God is all good, right?
But he does have second thoughts, right? We just learned that.
Well, yes,
Does he do that
but he does
a
it
lot?
anyway.
Does he
Change
have-
his mind.
Yeah,
Sorry, change God's mind. God
Yeah.
changed God's mind.
Does he-
Yes,
a lot, yeah.
God feels regret after the flood. All kinds of other times when you can argue with God. Moses argues with God a lot. Again, that's the biblical God. That's the Torah God. Okay, the prophetic God is different. The medieval God is different. This particular God and this particular story apparently makes the decision. If we don't sustain that perspective, we must assume a critique of God's character, which God seems susceptible to, considering God's thoughts of concealing plans at the beginning of the story. In other words,
Right.
we either have to believe that our God is morally corrupt a little bit, or God's character is not 100%, or that in the end, God was right. You have to pick one. Okay, that's pretty problematic, right? Not a good choice to have. Okay. As I said before, the problem is that the story is in our canon. We're forced to read the story. We know this story. We can't just ignore it and say, no, well, that's not really God, or it's a small story. This is a big story, okay? A big story about our morally problematic God, okay? And we're talking about, we're not talking about imposing 21st century ethics and morality on this, okay? I always want to keep us within that cultural that cultural repertoire of the biblical times. Even during the biblical times, okay, there appears to be moral problems, okay? I know of no time in humanity's existence when, children are found to be unredeemably evil in the tens of thousands. Okay, that just doesn't exist. So forget our 21st century ethics and morals. Even the author of Sodom and Gomorrah feels this moral quandary. Okay, and even that time they start to feel it. And the confidence in the deity starts to wane a little bit. Okay, so that's Sodom and Gomorrah. Okay, Jonah, if you remember the book of Jonah, which also we read on Yom Kippur.
I got a question.
Yeah.
Okay. Why isn't God considered the duality of God? There's the duality of man. Why is it?
It does not exist in the Torah. The duality of God. There is no duality of God in the Torah. The duality of God, like the different aspects of God, that's like
Duality means God can be both good and evil.
not according to the Torah. Not according to the Torah. The biblical God,
Okay, biblical God.
that's different from,
Okay.
yeah.
You consider, the different things that God is imposed
okay.
on his spouse. So they're, okay.
Yeah, that,
So
there's not really that concept. I mean, you can argue, but I mean, I would argue against it. But you can, if you argue that that God is, all-knowing, all-powerful, omnipresent, all good, right? All these sort of things. But the truth of it is, Judaism doesn't sustain the idea that God is evil. I mean, God might be vengeful or jealous, but the idea of an evilness within God is not a Jewish concept. In fact, it's not even a Christian concept. They came up with somebody else to be evil, right? The idea within Judaism is that either God is all good and we are messing it up, right? I mean, or it's not in God's control or that sort of stuff. I mean, everything is understood within the Torah as God, knowing more than all of us, right? There is a higher moral authority that we're our feeble little minds can't understand.
There's
So-
moral authority, but again, you said the different actions, the vengeance of God. You take a look at, it's like his allowance of things to go, or let's say evil to exist. You know what I'm saying? It's not-
Well, God, if you take the idea of the flood, God's plan for the flood is to wipe out wickedness,
Mhm.
right? It's a good, it comes from a good place, right? But that, of course, is understanding the idea again, just like in Sodom and Gomorrah, right? Was everyone on the earth wicked? Right? That's why some of the literary stuff doesn't quite match, right? Yeah, but the story of the flood is the idea that the earth was wicked and God, on this moral high ground, wanted to start again, right? He's not evil for doing so. He just, God wanted to restart, hit the reset button. Innocents are collateral damage in that way, right? From God's perspective, perhaps. But if you ask the biblical author versus if you ask the Talmudic rabbis, God is all good and, we're just misunderstanding, that kind of stuff. So, in regards to Jonah, this is, the story is, I believe, not just a critique, but I think it's a polemic against Sodom and Gomorrah. In Jonah, if you remember, Jonah is an Israelite prophet sent to convince people of the city of Nineveh, a pagan city, that they should save themselves by altering their behavior. Okay. So again, the cities are both non-Israelite cities. So first of all, why does God care? Okay, but that's another question. But the prophet is told to proclaim before the city dwellers that they will suffer a devastating destruction in 40 days unless they repair their behavior. The people of Nineveh, if you remember, simply respond with their belief in God. The people of Nineveh believed God. That's what the text says. They proclaimed a fast, a great and small alike put on sackcloth. When the news reached the king of Nineveh, he rose from his throne, took off his robe, put on a sackcloth, sat in ashes, and he had the word cried through Nineveh, by decree of the king and his nobles, no man or beast or flock or herd shall taste anything. They shall not graze, they shall not drink water. They shall be covered with sackcloth, man and beast, and shall cry mightily to God. Let everyone turn back from his evil ways and from injustice of which he is guilty. Who knows but that God may turn and relent? He may turn back from his wrath so that we do not perish. Okay. So the king of Nineveh says, we're in trouble, guys. We need to fix it. We're going to fast, we're going to sit in ashes, and we're going to turn from our evil ways. Okay? So if we see a point-by-point comparison of these stories, okay? We love graphs. So the proposed destruction of a pagan city, okay? In Sodom and Gomorrah, God tells Abraham of his plans to destroy 2 pagan cities, Sodom and Gomorrah, so that Abraham will be able to teach what is just and right. Okay, remember that from the quote, right? I'm trying to shape Abraham so that he and his descendants can teach what is just and right. Okay, that's the plan. They are wicked, so God will destroy them. In Jonah, God tells Jonah of his plan to destroy a pagan city, Nineveh, as punishment for their unethical behavior. God wants Jonah to motivate the people to repent so that his planned punishments will be unnecessary. Totally different. Totally different attempt. Okay? So right away, we should ask, why are the people of Sodom and Gomorrah not given this chance? Right? Shouldn't Abraham have gone down to Sodom and Gomorrah, proclaimed that they were to be destroyed, and given them an opportunity to turn from their ways? Isn't that more of what God would want? According to the Jonah story, yes, that is what God wants. God does not want to kill people and children or whatever it is. God wants to teach a lesson. Okay?
Which one of these came first?
Genesis came first.
No, but the Sodom and Gomorrah and Jonah, which?
That's what I mean. You mean in real life?
In the story, in the progression of the Torah, which?
So
story?
Sodom and Gomorrah occurs in Genesis, and Jonah occurs much later in the prophets.
Okay.
So much later.
And it was written earlier, we think. Genesis.
This part of Genesis was written before Jonah. Yes. Jonah is a response to it. Yes. Yes. Good question. Okay. So the Jews' reaction, meaning the prophet. Okay. Abraham senses such destruction as unjust, as we all did, since there should be some cluster of innocent people present, however minimal. He argues God down to considering a mere 10 inhabitants of Sodom and Gomorrah as worthy of saving the city. Okay. He says, this can't be right. I know you, God. This doesn't seem like you. This can't be right. I don't believe it. Okay. Jonah, on the other hand, believes the city should simply be destroyed. Whatever, kill them. I don't care. They're not me. Right? He attempts to flee from the assignment on the open seas. He goes in the opposite direction. He goes to Tarshish. His action then endangers the innocent people on the boat with him. He has himself thrown overboard, ostensibly to bring about his death. Okay? In other words, he does not want to do this. Okay? What does he care about a non-Israelite city that God is going to destroy? He doesn't care. Okay? So right here, we should start to see the balance change in terms of who's good, right? Who's the good guy here? Okay? In the Sodom and Gomorrah story, it seems that Abraham, okay, is the good guy, trying to say, wait a minute, okay? Here, God is like, you've got to do this to Jonah, okay? Jonah's the bad guy here, okay? It's completely flipped, all right? So what does God do? God's actions. Abraham's attempt to assuage God end abruptly at 10. The author does not have him push God further to consider even one innocent person, nor is repentance ever entertained as an option. Abraham departs, and the fate of the city is left as it was first planned. In other words,
He tried.
Yeah, kind of. We don't know why he stopped at 10.
Mm.
We don't get to see that, right? Why didn't he go down to 1? The rabbis racked their brains about this. You were doing so well. 50, 45, 40, 30, 20, 10. You didn't stop. 5? What about 5? It stopped. Okay, we don't know why. Abraham gave up. Okay, and the plan goes as thought. Jonah, on the other hand, is miraculously retrieved from the ocean's depth by a giant fish, and then forced to appear in Nineveh to create the opportunity for repentance. He informs the people of their options. In other words, God goes to great lengths to get him there. It is important to God that the prophet speaks to these people and gives them this chance. Okay?
A lot of people would have lost their job.
Right. Yeah.
I mean,
God does not fire Jonah. God pushes him
Yeah.
and says, you've got to do this. You've got to do it. Okay? The conclusion is the people of Sodom and Gomorrah continue in their iniquitous ways, and the city and all the inhabitants are annihilated. Okay? Whereas in Jonah, the people of Nineveh go into mourning. Public repentance on a mass scale takes place. The planned punishment is now unnecessary, and the city is spared. Okay. Many people like to teach that the destruction was never going to happen anyway, that it was just a threat, right? But that really wasn't the plan, right? But the idea, when you look at these stories face to face, we see the author of Jonah is saying, this is how Sodom and Gomorrah should have gone. Okay. Yeah.
Why don't you include, let's say, in the trilogy of Ian Job, in his trials and tribulations?
In terms of what?
I'd say the absolute goodness of God, God and how, let's say, his treatment on Job, compared with Jonah.
Well, they're completely different stories, Brian. I mean, Job, the story is a polemic against good and evil, the idea of doing well and good and evil. The lesson of Job is stuff's going to happen to you because I'm God and I say so. God says to Job, when Job says, why are you doing this? I'm a good person. God says, where were you when the world was created? I know more than you. I'm more powerful than you. Stop complaining. In other words, it told the world, you can do everything right and God can still play a game and still mess you up.
But is it Sodom and Gomorrah kind of good and evil?
I'm not sure I'm understanding your comparison here. Job wasn't evil. That was the point. Job was good. He was punished anyway. So I'm not sure I understand your question.
Okay.
No,
No, I guess when you compare, let's say for Abraham, let's say Abraham was good, and Sodom and Gomorrah was good and evil.
Okay.
So, we're getting it, as I see, there's no, let's say, overarching statement out there with God, and that's why that's why I brought up the duality, because God can be, let's say, evil and not evil,
But that's the problem right there, Brian. If we can't say that God is evil, what is God when God does things that we feel is immoral? Is God the archetype of morality that knows more on a higher scale than we do, or is God immoral? Both sides are scary, right? Our human brains understand morality based on the teachings and the ethics that we understand as humans, right? Certain religions will say that God knows a great deal more than us, and so something that may seem unethical has a higher moral value that we simply cannot comprehend. Other people say that's not true. This is simply immoral, and it criticizes the perfection of the deity, right? We believe that God to be perfect, right? At least Judaism understands God to be perfect, which means that these aspects, these actions, we can't just say that's not perfect, that's not wrong, right? Our human brains couldn't possibly understand it, right? Just like in the book of Job, Job directly makes that question, directly challenges God and says, I am exactly what you've told me to be, and you have punished me anyway. And the answer that God gives is a horrible answer. You know, you're nothing. You're dust and ashes. You are, where were you? Do you think you know better than me? Is what the God of Job says. But the God of Job is very different from the God of Deuteronomy, who's very different from the God of Genesis, who's very different from the God of Jonah. And that's what's important. There is no continuity in the character of God in our Tanakh, or even later, right? When the Zohar came and the medieval philosophers came, I mean, you know, we understand who God is by reading the story from which the author understands God, right? And that the problem is that we're seeing when we study, Ryan, is that when we read about a God action here and then we read about how God is there and they don't make sense, we can't simply say, well, he might be good and evil. We have to say that author believes that this God is doing this and that author is doing that God is doing that. Okay? Doing okay over there?
I'm fine, but
Okay.
it's so undefinitive.
Yes.
It's very undefinitive.
But that's the thing is if you know,
And it makes me wonder if other religions, I guess, have equally as conflictual religious
They do.
texts.
They do. There are horrible things in every canon.
Yeah.
Awful things in the New Testament and awful things in the Quran and awful things in Hinduist texts and I mean there are problems as we as humans grow ethically and morally. When we read the words of people who are not as morally or ethically elevated as we, they're in our holy books and canon. And what do we do about that? That's the $1 million question, right? Is can we erase it? No, we can't just not read it, right? I mean, in Reform Judaism, we sort of pick and choose what we want to read from each parsha. If there's something that to me sounds horrible, I'm not going to read it. But it still exists. It's still in our holy scroll, right? Can't do anything about that. So that's a major problem. It's a major problem.
Is that why some weeks we don't talk about the parshas?
No, no, the parsha is never that bad. No. No, sometimes I just don't want to talk about the parsha. But there are times where, well, that's not true. There are times where I will encounter something unethical in the Torah, and I will talk about why I feel it's unethical. But yeah.
Recently there was the one where like Judah's daughter, like
Oh yeah, the rape of Tamar. Yeah.
Yeah.
You didn't want me to chat about that one?
I mean
The
like
ancestral rape of a daughter? Yeah.
yeah,
right.
like how do we
I don't read it. Why would I want to
Yeah.
read it? Like, why would I?
Yeah.
It's a horrible story about a daughter disguising herself as a maiden, mating with her father. And then, I mean, like, I'm sure there was a lesson there for the biblical author, for their cultural repertoire. For us, it is so out of, bounds that it's difficult for me to find a lesson in there, right? That's what I was talking about in the beginning when saying that certain rejections are easy, right? When we read something like that, it's easy for us to say, well, there's nothing good you can bring from that. Like, it's a horrible story. I'll just, whatever it is. Stories like this, though, are a little harder, right? They're morally problematic, but they're a little more, it's not, it's.
Well, it's
an
also
issue.
something that we do in a time of war. There are civilian casualties.
Sure,
I mean,
okay.
so but whereas in the other story, it seems like it's hard to find any corollary.
Right. So, I mean, the book of Joshua is a horrible book. I mean, there's genocide and it's, and it's divine. I mean, like horrible, horrible things from our point of view. But if you take it from the other point of view, from the author's point of view, that this is divinely, there's all kinds of, you have to wrap your head around some of these things. And sometimes we can do that. Sometimes we can say and teach from an objective point of view, being able to say, okay, well, this is what we disagree with it now, but this was the time then, and this is where it was coming from, okay? The laws against homosexuality in Leviticus, okay? We can say, well, we can argue that and where it came from and what the reason was. We can say, well, that doesn't really apply to our culture anymore, and so whatever it is. Genocide to be celebrated is a little bit tougher. Okay. You know, that sort of thing. These sort of stories, I think, are sort of in the middle, where you're sort of like, there's a conversation between God and the prophet about evil wrongdoers, and they're trying to change the situation. There's lessons in here, right? There are things we can draw from it. We can talk about this. It's not so sort of like, don't talk, at least in my perspective.
Are there like midrash or other stories? So I don't know if that's the right.
Midrash is fine. Yeah.
They explain this more or try to.
Yes, there are. In Bereshit Rabbah, there is. This does come up. I don't have enough familiarity with it to answer you. I have studied in depth the midrash on Job, and the rabbis in the midrash in the Talmud argue that even though the text doesn't say that Job was bad, he was. And if he was, he wasn't, and even if he was good, he wasn't as good as Abraham and all. They're very, very bad arguments. You know, my guess is the rabbis of the time would argue Sodom and Gomorrah is evil, and evil can occur everywhere. There's all kinds of mysterious stuff going on, and if God says they're all evil, we believe what God is saying, right? It's not a great answer, but it's their answer. For us, we have different answers, different questions, because we come from a different time. So the questions that we have to ask ourselves, these looming questions over both the narratives of Sodom and Gomorrah and Jonah, is what is just punishment? Right? This is the argument against capital punishment. Is it just? Is it reasonable? Right? And for what? Is repentance always acceptable? Meaning, are there things that you can do that even if you repent, it's still not okay? Right? What length should we go to avoid punishments that have irreversible effects? Okay, all big capital punishment issues. Okay, meaning, is it a just punishment to kill someone because they are wicked? If they repent their ways, is that it? Are they cleansed of? I mean, we don't know what Sodom and Gomorrah did. We don't know what Nineveh did. If they were killing people, does it matter if they repented? Right? Or what else? God knows what they were doing. Right? They could have just been worshiping idols. We don't know, but. You know, is it acceptable that someone can just repent and they are done? Okay. And what if we're wrong? Right? It's irreversible. Once you destroy an entire city, it's irreversible. What lengths should we go to avoid that kind of punishment? Okay. The idea of justice. Both these stories are about justice. Justice in the Jonah story means saving people from their destiny. Okay? Jonah goes and saves the people of Nineveh for what would be destiny, which is death. Justice in the Abraham story means punishing those who deserve punishment. Very different lessons. Okay? God in the story of Jonah is saying that there is a way out, that they are no longer deserving of punishment, if they were deserving of that kind of punishment to begin with. Right? In Jonah, right, God's the good guy. God stands for justice. The Jonah character is ambivalent about the whole thing, right? Says, whatever, kill him, I don't care, it's not me. God says justice is important. Okay? In Genesis, Abraham is the voice of justice. How could this be just what you are doing? Do you not judge rightly, justly? Right? In Jonah, God rebukes Jonah's insensitivity over the destruction of Nineveh. God says in the book of Jonah, and should I not care about Nineveh, the great city in which there are more than 120,000 persons who do not yet know their right hand from their left, and many beasts as well. They don't know what's right and wrong yet. It's our job to teach them what is right and wrong. right? Should I not care about people who are not doing right? Should I not be able to fix them? They don't know their right hand from their left hand. They're so confused. Okay? In Genesis, God doesn't care. God doesn't give the thought of repentance, of change, a second thought, let alone about the beasts as well, the animals, right? These are two very different gods. Okay? There are two stories that explore the same theme, but from the opposite perspectives. Jonah is critical of Sodom and Gomorrah. The real question that we asked before, right, that I always ask in regards to Deuteronomy and the book of Job is how on earth could both of these stories exist in the canon, right? How on earth was this allowed to happen? And you've asked this question before, right? Is why couldn't they take it out? Why couldn't they put stuff in, the redactors, why can't they take some things out, right? That's the big question with biblical archaeologists and scholars.
And now, though, nobody takes anything.
Oh, no, it's fully canon. We're talking about when the canonization process was happening, right? In the first century BC to first century CE, right? Why couldn't they say, well, hey, guys, wait a minute. This seems to be a direct polemic against the other. Shouldn't we just keep one, right? They didn't. They kept it all, right?
Or just have it end different.
Or have it, or change it, right? These are the questions where we just can theorize, right? The theories are that certain things were already canonized, not necessarily canonized, but well-known enough that they couldn't be removed. Different schools might not have had the different authority to do so. They might have felt themselves restricted in certain ways.
Might have been the Great Compromise, kind of like the Constitutional
Could have been.
Convention, right? You had to
Could have
just-
been someone saying, look, we have to keep it in and, we'll figure it out. We just don't know. But we have, this, just like Deuteronomy and Job, are examples of, two opposite perspectives on the same lesson. If you just read Sodom and Gomorrah, you learn something very differently from when you read Jonah.
Maybe
Okay.
that's the reason they want you to read it all.
Well, that would be nice, right, if they want you to read it all. I'm more convinced by Jonah, but Sodom and Gomorrah got a front row seat in Genesis
Yeah.
with Abraham,
And yet,
okay?
It makes sense.
wasn't there a time difference between when it was written, each book?
I would say at least half a millennia. Yeah.
Okay, so the belief system of what was to be loved and what was to be feared at God could have changed.
Well, yes, that's not the question. The question is, why were they both put in the book then? Right? Why were they both put in the Bible? If the belief system changed, why didn't they just get rid of Sodom and Gomorrah?
Museum.
A museum?
in a
Well, to be
museum.
fair, the Tanakh is a library, so and that could
Yeah.
be thing. Is it is a library, right? It's not one book; it's a
Well, we have
library.
this conversation
but-
going on today with these monuments to the Confederate soldiers. What to do with them? I mean, and so if we don't like them, times have changed, and we don't believe in that. Whatever it was that caused people to put it up. Some people are saying just put it in a museum, put it where it belongs. But
Sure. Well, there's also, there's people ban books, right? There's the, Huck Finn and stuff like that carry with it the N-word inside, and people say that's inappropriate, right? To Kill a Mockingbird, horrible imagery, but why do we still read it,
Harry Potter,
right? Harry Potter, sure, right? There are unethical and immoral aspects in our literary culture.
Yeah.
Why keep them? But that's a different question.
Does anybody
right?
make that argument though? That's why they're in there. Is that just
I don't know. I've heard the what ifs. I've never really heard a really good answer. Most of the answers that I hear are about what were possibly the powers of the redactor, and that maybe they didn't have the power to change it, or they didn't want to.
is one potential argument that they have to explain maybe why bad things happen, right? So cities do get destroyed, right, by natural disasters or whatever, and so this is one explanation for why that happens.
Anything's possible, right? I mean,
Because it doesn't
You know.
say how God destroyed them, so it could have been a flood, it could have been a fire, it could have been anything, but we're not graced to know that. We just know that
Something
they
you
were
can't turn
destroyed.
around and look at.
right. Yeah, I believe it's raining sulfur, but we don't know. But you're right. And honestly, if you read from an archaeological point of view, they can start to trace that maybe there were cities and there was a giant earthquake and it was destroyed. So it may have been, and again, anything's possible. But a theory is that the cities were destroyed and they need an explanation, right? As to why, not the other way around, right? This is my argument
Right.
about the bullseye, right? Is that maybe there was an earthquake and they drew the bullseye around it, not that it happened. You know, the God destroyer or whatever that the story was written, and hey, what do you know? So we just don't know. But those are the things to think about, right? If the author was strong enough to get his polemic into the canon, why wasn't he strong enough to say remove this from the canon? We don't know. We don't know. The older story was put in circulation, but so is an alternative story to present another approach. So pretty fascinating. Okay, I believe our next class is in 2019. Let me see. Let's see to make sure. Yep. It would be the 27th of January. You guys get a break. So you guys get a break. Yeah, you might miss that one. And if you miss that one that day, I might miss that one. So, but yes, so friends, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah.